Hello everyone, this is Brown Sugar Customs. My name is Roderica and I am working on a bachelorette cake. So what we're doing is I've cut out the neckline and now I'm going to cut out a small sliver on each side for the waistline, which will help accent the abs, the six-pack that we're going to put on this beauty. Now we're going to use some buttercream. I'm just using American buttercream, just plain unsalted butter and powdered sugar, and whip it until it gets a creamy consistency. I like this buttercream the best to crumb coat my cakes because it acts as a great sealant for when I put the fondant on top. For this cake, I used a half sheet cake, and then I used two 8-inch circles at the bottom. But sometimes when I make this cake, I take another half sheet cake and bake it and cut it in half and stack them on top of each other to layer them. And but for this particular instance, I use the two 8-inch cakes at the bottom instead of a half sheet cake. I also used 4 blocks of butter just to give you an idea to crumb coat this cake. The filling on this cake is actually cream cheese, so I used 2 sticks of cream cheese to place in between the layers, and now I'm using the American buttercream for the outside. So that's 4 blocks of butter, 16 sticks of butter, and about 2 bags of powdered sugar is what it took to crumb coat this entire cake. Normally what I do is I'll do 2 coats. So this is the first coat of buttercream, and I'm just trying to get the cake covered and give it a little bit of shape. And then once I get through doing that first coverage, I'm going to put this into the refrigerator and let that solidify. And now that I've put it in the fridge, I'm going to go back behind it and put a second coat on the cake, just to cover the areas of cake that are showing, to smooth out any areas and kind of make some definition out of the cake. It's a little easier once the first coat has hardened. Then you have a little bit, the shape takes better form, and it makes it a little bit easier for you to get that second coat on. Also, with the first coat being a little harder, then it's not as hard to put that second coat of icing on. Sometimes when you're trying to put icing on top of icing, it just becomes a mess and it's hard to create the shape. So give it that one little flash in the refrigerator, let it harden, then come back, do a second coat. Usually what I'll do is I'll put on some gloves afterwards and maybe dampen my hands and kind of run it across the cake to smooth out those edges. Now what I'm doing is I'm creating his rib cage and his 6-pack. So I'm drawing the lines so I'll know where to put. We're going to use those crumbs that I carved off the neckline, and for the rib cage I'm going to use those to make some cake pop dough. And these are my sections that I'm going to put the cake pop dough in. So now I have my quadrants, and I'm going to put the cake pop dough in each section. And it's just regular cake pop dough, just cake scraps. Add just a little bit of icing, not very much, just enough to make it stick. And then you form it into like little patties. But make sure on this is his chest. You don't want to make the patties too big because you don't want him to look like he has breasts. You want him to just have a man's chest, natural forming chest. And what I'm doing is I'm pressing down on the edges so that it graduates from his chest up into the top of the section. You'll see, you know how it should look, but it's good if you just mash down the edges all the way around so that it's flush with the cake. Now that we have that on, we're going to do a crumb coat over the cake pop dough. So we need to cover all of the dough. None of it should be exposed. And this will be how we create his chest and his six-pack. Make sure you smooth out the buttercream in between the cracks so you can see the definition. Don't put on the buttercream so thick that you can't see the lines in between. Okay, now we're about done with that. I put on my gloves, like I said, and I put a little warm water on my hands and kind of ran it across the cake and made it smooth. And now I'm putting my fondant on top. So I need the cake, the buttercream, and all the edges to be nice and smooth. So when I roll this fondant out on top of it, it really looks like skin. I just took some white fondant, added a tinge of brown, and kind of made it so it was this complexion. This was the complexion that the Bachelorette stated she wanted. So now I am smoothing out any air pockets, making sure the fondant is sticking to the definition of the six-pack, the lines that go down to his waistline. You know, just a really nice chiseled body is what we want it to look like. Now that we have it all on, we're going to cut the excess fondant from around the cake. And usually I just cut and then just press in the edges underneath the cake, under the bottom. I'll use either my hand, sometimes I'll use the back of the knife, just something to kind of cut away the excess, and then press the leftover skin, I'm going to call it, under the leftover fondant underneath the cake. Try not to cut the fondant too short because you don't want to see the icing underneath. Give yourself a little bit of leeway, and then just tuck in the rest. But try to get it cut as close as you can to the cake. Now we are going to do the definition. We're going to do some shading. The shading in between the muscles, which gives it that more 3D look, make it look a little bit more natural. So this is the shading. I used a little bit of brown with some vodka, and put it in my little cup, and I'm using a brush just to paint that. Some people use an airbrush machine. But I was being lazy and didn't feel like taking it out and putting it together. I just figured I would just go ahead and just do a quick little paintbrush. And I'm just trying to move the color around a little bit so it doesn't look all blotchy. But just make sure you get all the lines in between, his pelvic line, the line coming down the middle. Make sure you get all of that, because it looks really good in the end once it dries and it looks like a natural body. Now I am putting on the nipples. So I used the icing tip, and I just used the icing tip to rolled out a piece of brown fondant, and just cut out 2 circles. And now I am making sure the edges are not all frayed. Try to, smooth them out and then set them on. Of course, again, you press down the edges so that they try to seem like they're flush with the skin, or make sure the brown flows naturally onto the light brown so it could look natural. And then of course we can't forget the nipple, the little ball that goes on top of the nipple. Mine doesn't want to stay on. Okay, I got them on there. And let me do the other side. And I'm just basically eyeballing it, which I do a lot. I'm sure there's probably tools and techniques to make everything identical, but a lot of times I just eyeball things. As long as it doesn't look like it's too off, I'll roll with it. Okay, that one is a little too big, so we're gonna we're gonna make another one and see. I don't like the way that one looks, so we're gonna put this other one on. Okay. So now we are taking the remainder of the fondant from the skin and we are going to make his male member. I'm just going to roll a big hunk of the fondant and I'm trying to tie off the end a little bit, squeeze the neck of the end to kind of make it a little bit separate, and then I'm going to press in the middle, kind of make it look like a tooth with a long root. That's what it kind of resembles. So I'm making my lines and just kind of elongating it, smoothing it out a little bit, trying to make sure that it's not oblong or, you know, trying to just basically shape it. You know, this fondant is almost like Play-Doh. So, and I used to love to play with Play-Doh when I was a kid. So it worked in my favor. I'm making the center vein. So I'm just pinching the fondant up to the top, trying to smooth out the sides. I like to use my hands because it kind of gives the impression of veins or natural. The palm of my hand is giving the impression on the fondant of the veins. So it helps it look a little more natural. And I'm putting some indentations to kind of make it a little more defined. Now I need to cut off the end so that I can put the tip on, and I'm rolling this out. Looks like a little baby potato. Roll it like an oval, and now I'm mashing down the end to kind of look like a mushroom, the head of a mushroom. And I'm pinching off the edge so it can look a little more natural. And I'm gonna just stick it on there. It'll usually stay because I just cut it, so it's still a little fresh and sticky. So put that on there and just, you know, make sure it looks natural. Trying to make it go with it. I'm gonna make a hole in the middle because of course there should be one. Now I'm going to put it on the cake. Some instances, some of the ladies like to have their cake to have on underwear, but in this instance, I was asked not to put underwear on him. A little risque, if you ask me, but you know, hey, it's a bachelorette party, no rules. And it looks like that's about it. We got everything on. Not so bad, huh? Definitely looks like a man's body. Yay me.